Thanks everyone for joining the meeting this evening for the Lower Southeast Rising Project Advisory Committee. First up, wanted to see if we have any public comment, and I think Stephanie, maybe you and Pam, we're gonna talk at this time. Great. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. So I failed to introduce myself when we were talking about fall, so I'll try to do better now. I'm Stephanie Frederick. I'm former land use chair of the Brentwood-Darlington Neighborhood Association, now running for association chair. I have two topics. First, many residents of Brentwood-Darlington know about and appreciate the tremendous amount of work that has gone into carrying out the Lower Southeast Rising study. And I think I can safely say thank you from all of us. The second topic, but related, is that the Brentwood-Darlington Neighborhood Association, the BDNA, is poised for a relaunch. Our COVID phase has wound down, and several board members have moved on after long service, which opens up board participation opportunities. On October 6th, the BDNA board will meet to elect new board members to serve through May 2023. And that enhanced board will then elect a chair. And I'm running for chair. And if I'm elected chair, I can guarantee that we will be advocating to City Council to adopt the Lower Southeast Rising Plan. And that is, we'll be advocating to bring your hard work to fruition. I feel strongly we can't let this work be wasted. Council reacts to lists of names, so the more people behind the advocacy at the Neighborhood Association, the better. If Council adopts, the BDNA will work with Planning and Sustainability, PBOT, and TriMet in the most supportive and least annoying ways possible to implement the recommended strategies of the plan. So we will have other meaningful projects. For example, we'll be working with Impact Northwest to recast our community centered as a climate resilience hub, which is a very exciting and newsworthy project. But our first order of business will be the Lower Southeast Rising plan. So to join the board, one must be a resident, property owner, or business license holder of a Brentwood-Darlington business. You can also become a board member even if you live outside Brentwood-Darlington, but you subscribe to improving the well-being of Brentwood-Darlington's residents, which makes all of you PAC members just wonderfully eligible to be BDNA board members, since Brentwood-Darlington is the core of the study area, and you've worked so hard on improving the livability of our study area. So minimum commitment is attendance at the monthly board meeting, so it's not onerous, but we probably would expect that you would become very enthusiastic about our various projects and might want to get involved with excitement. But in any case, it's once a month, first Thursday of the month. So this is my pitch, please consider joining us in helping to ensure, first of all, that the Lower Southeast Rising Plan is adopted by Council. So I believe that in the chat, you will find the Zoom link to our October 6th meeting, along with the BDNA's website address. Is that right, Pam?
I'm putting it up now, Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, so thank you very much, everyone, and good evening.
Good, thanks, Stephanie. Are there any questions from members for Stephanie or Pam? And I'll just, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say, I've worked with both Stephanie and Pam in a couple different regards and things in the neighborhood, and we'll just vouch for them both being wonderful people to work with. Super easy and knowledgeable and insightful. The PAC committee people clearly know that, but I can say working in other spaces as well, it's equally as beneficial and great. So 2 thumbs up.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Scott,
Very
Anna?
kind.
Yeah, I just want to say the exact same thing. So the Woodstock Neighborhood Association, especially my person, has been collaborating and working very closely with BDNA, and especially Stephanie and Pam were super helpful for me to navigate the system and to learn a lot about the city. So it's a really robust group of people who are really driven. So I can only, if you have a little time to commit, please do. It's a very, very well-established working connection already there. That's not wasting your time with sitting around stupidly.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Any other, and I'll just sort of add that if you enjoyed sort of doing what the work we're doing, developing a plan, that this is a good opportunity to sort of keep advocating for the actions, and as this plan moves through council and then gets adopted, it's a good way to stay involved. So
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. We can't let it drop.
great. Well, thanks, Stephanie. Feel free to stick around if you want.
I think I will.
good.
I know I said good evening, but actually I want to stay on. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks. So we're gonna go ahead and I will reshare my screen. You able to see that now? The update slide?
Yeah.
Yep, good. Okay, thanks. Didn't share the red box, but real fast wanted to give an update on our public involvement summary. We shared it out last week, but just flagging again that that is now live and online. It's not in a great place yet to share how publicly, though. I'll admit. We're going to put it on the sort of project website, and I'll put it in a newsletter that's going to go out to our mailing list later this week. So if you're itching to like share it with your neighbors, maybe just wait a few days because we'll have a nice, it'll look better, the format when we send it out that way, and then it should be easy to forward. But if you want to look at it, I'll drop a link again in the chat there. So feel free to take a look at that, and hopefully it reflects sort of some of the things you've seen in previous meetings. Any other updates that anyone has questions about that? I'm just gonna kind of keep moving because we want to get into the heart of the meeting tonight. So yeah, thinking about, we're going to kind of do a quick recap on the community development scenario, and then we'll jump right into the focus more on transportation tonight. So Bill, do you want to just give a minute or two recap about what we talked about last month for those who weren't in attendance, and sort of help sort of orient us on this map?
Sure. And just to remind people, during our last meeting, which is August 29th, we talked about how we got to a preferred community development scenario, and what received the greatest amount of public support was a centers and corridors scenario. And that generally is looking at providing expanded options for housing along some of the major corridors like 52nd and 72nd. And probably most significantly, especially given the context that the Burma-Darlington neighborhood does not have great access to services, a key aspect was fostering a new neighborhood center focused around Flaville and 72nd and extending out towards 82nd. So that really is documented in that public involvement summary, and also wanted to mention that we have a preferred framework report that's documenting how we got to this preferred scenario, and is also documenting the transportation components. And we're anticipating that's going to be out and available in early October, and we'll let you know when that's posted. So I think that's where we are with that, at least writ large. And it's always good to keep this in mind when you're thinking about the transportation scenarios as well. So not much of a neighborhood center at Flaville and 72nd, but it's something we want to work towards based on what we heard from the community.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, and just sort of wanted to sort of frame this to keep in mind as we move through the transportation improvements. And so again, just to do a little bit of quick sort of reminder recap, this is how we had presented or sort of grouped together and presented potential improvements during that online open house that was shared with the public. So we had the sort of major and local street improvements, and these were the sort of 50-second, 70-second Woodstock streets that are really needing crossings more. Some places have sidewalk gaps, those types of improvements. And then we had the local streets, which are these which are sort of less, the more neighborhood focused streets, but needing traffic calming, some sidewalk infill, and then the traffic calming areas that we had developed, that's where these sort of hatched out areas are, and then showed the paving needs as well, or sort of some of the priorities for paving. And then I'm just going to move through these really quick because they'll sort of come back in a minute as the refined maps. But these were the sort of, we laid out where the existing bike network was, and then potential new or upgraded facilities, both neighborhood greenways and then facilities on busier streets. And then we had the bus network redesign map that showed potential route changes to the bus network. So for example, sort of moving service off Duke, keeping continuous service on Woodstock, 72nd having a sort of a more direct north-south line, and keeping service on Full Bell as well. So those were what we shared with the public and got feedback on. That's what's in that community engagement report. And what we've done is taken that feedback we got, feedback from you all, the survey, and tried to align those more into really distinct projects that we can then refine further based on you all's feedback. So it leaves us with 13 neighborhood greenways, 15 corridor improvements, and 11 local street improvements, both sort of streets and areas. And the sort of dilemma with this is, it's not feasible to do all these projects, especially not all at once. And so there's a need for refinement and sort of prioritization of these projects into a way that really benefits the community to the maximum, to its maximum, and also things we're able to really develop in the near term and get excitement around and make transformative change. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We sent out the project booklet in the email that went out last week, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. But if not, you can take a look at it during this meeting, and we can also take feedback after the meeting as well, or answer any questions. But just to kind of go through those really quickly, this is the neighborhood greenways map that sort of shows how we separated those out into more or less ability to move around on lower traffic streets that are the shared streets that I'm sure you're familiar with, but sort of building out that network, filling in the gaps of connectivity. And so we've got the 13 projects here that you can see, and we can come back to these if you have any questions. I'll just sort of run through these real fast, but the transportation priorities on the corridors. So this is, again, those streets like 52nd, Tolman, Woodstock, and Harney. So really sort of, addressing some of the issues with speeding, long distances between crossings, intersection safety issues are sort of captured in these projects. And then the local street improvements are those sort of less busy streets, but still really critical streets for sort of neighborhood connectivity, getting around by walking, or sort of circulation around. That's what around the main streets, so around Woodstock is what that project is, and then the zones as well for traffic calming sort of is needed at a more holistic level for safer speeds. And if you look at the booklet, this is just an example of what the project, sort of each project has as a sheet, but it describes the project a bit, shows sort of the connections to community destinations, and then how it connects to other facilities, as well as what would be potentially be included with that project. So we're kind of at the place here where we did a quick, we've gotten it to identifying the corridors. Haven't gone to the detail yet of looking a ton at all the different elements that would be needed at each of these crossings, or the specific cross section. That's what's going to happen in the next phase as we start to prioritize these into different tiers of projects, because we really only have really the capacity to do that detailed project refinement for those tier 1 projects. But that's what sort of should hopefully orient you. And before I'll jump into some questions, but Misa, I see you have a question, so.
Yeah, it's kind of tied in with what you were just saying.
Yeah.
I was just curious what the numbers meant and how you would choose which projects got worked on first. You were kind of answering that already.
Okay. Yeah, so the numbers aren't prioritized. Like, it's not that this is the number 1 priority for the neighborhood greenways. So how we prioritize those is actually going to be something that you all weigh in on tonight, and then we'll move forward with and come back with a proposed list of those tiered projects. So just to clarify that those numbers are not indicative of the ranking or something.
Brian, this is Bevan. I've got a question. What does it mean sort of to prioritize, or in the event that a project does not end up on the priority list? Is it still, kind of in the docket eventually? It is like, and then I think, back to the previous question, are we looking at maybe, and I understand a firm number might not be possible to provide given that the cost for different projects is going to vary pretty significantly, but are we looking at like 3 to 5 projects within the next 1 to 2 years, and then another 5 within the next 5 years, and then the rest might be 10 plus? Like, are there timelines and sort of a sense of how many projects might be possible in the shorter term?
Yeah, and Zach, feel free to jump in here. I think I'd say that our tier 1 projects are typically in what we try to go with the 1 to 5 year timeline. So those are the ones that we'd be really trying to actively pursue fundraising for in the various forms of funding we have. And then the next tier of projects would be not entirely opportunistic, but they would sort of fall down, further down the list. So we'd really probably need some sustained sort of advocacy to get those projects brought back up. But occasionally, it's also, for example, if a project was a street was being resurfaced, it's a good time to pull out the plan. Even if it was a tier 2 project, we might say, oh, this one could move forward. We could add bike lanes or whatever the improvement's going to be.
Oh, I see.
So sometimes they can sort of jump the queue in circumstances like that. Steph, I don't know, do you have anything else to add?
I think you covered it really well. I worked on a similar plan called Northwest in Motion for Northwest Portland, and it was exactly like that. We had like 5 neighborhood greenway projects and 5 corridor improvements that were the tier 1 projects. And those were the ones that we really earmarked funding for. We actively pursued funding for. We got funding through our Fixing Our Streets local gas tax for those projects. But we have done a couple tier 2 projects because things just come up. Like Brian said, a paving project, a private developer might be doing some improvements on a tier 2 project, and that allows us to add a crossing. So yeah, the tier 2 projects are still on the docket. They're just a little more opportunistic and a little harder to predict when we'll get to them. All of them would be added to our transportation system plan. So whether it's in the top tier or not, they'll all be kind of eligible for future funding. And I agree with that sort of 5-year time frame. That's sort of what we'd want to get at. And with this number of projects, I would guess we're looking at similar kind of 5 or 6 in each category, maybe for the top tier.
Yeah, Scott.
Thank you for all these explanations. That's very helpful. My question has to do with if us as PAC members or neighborhood association representatives, whatever, Do we have a role in that, or is like once these get prioritized, it's on the city's plate? Does it need like further community advocacy to keep those like either present, or does it also mean like, oh, if we are advocating for these projects, it's taking funding from something else? What I'm hearing y'all describe is that like, oh, it's better to, when you're already doing work here, remember there was that other project to try and dovetail that together. Is that a us sort of thing that we can be advocating for, or is it sort of out of our purview?
I mean, I think advocacy is always helpful. It's always good to remind people, even if we take this plan to city council and it gets adopted, you know, it's always easier to do projects when there's community advocates, you know, out there reminding the city that we said we would do these projects, that they were a priority, things like that, especially if projects are more controversial, things like that. But oftentimes, you know, the easier projects just kind of are pretty easy to do once we have that council adoption. I think where we need your feedback is more on how we prioritize, what kind of factors we should be taking into account the most. We'll talk about that, and just does this list of projects seem right, and any glaring omissions or things that you'd really like to see.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, and that's a good sort of segue. So that is the questions we were hoping to sort of get at. And I know that some of you might be coming on this like pretty cold, and I'm happy to sort of walk through any of these projects. You know, Zeph and I are here to sort of talk through if you have a question about, oh, what's that one on Tolman or 52nd. But also just wanted to kind of get a quick take from you all. Is there, because this really is sort of the last time we can ask, is there anything missing, you know, before we go into prioritization? Are there projects here that you see that you feel like would not be necessary? And then any modifications that are needed would be a great time to bring those up as well. So I'll just open it up there. And just noting that we will be moving into the sort of prioritization after this. So we'll talk about sort of how they rank among each other now, but sort of those big questions we'll start with.
This is Bevan. I'd be happy to kind of kick things off and
Yeah.
break that initial silence.
Go for it.
So I think two that maybe in my mind aren't super high priorities would be sort of the throughways north and south of Woodstock. I think the one just south only has a block that's unpaved, and there's quite a bit of development. And it seems like a lot of improvements are sort of being done as a result of that development. And that actually seems more, I understand it would sort of allow kind of traffic to circulate off of the main street, but it actually does seem more sort of beneficial to cars than say pedestrians and bikers and, you know, folks that, you know, increasing ADA access and whatnot. So, I mean, of all of these, I mean, I love pretty much everything. I also really like those improvements, but would maybe deprioritize that personally. And then could you show the like existing conditions map?
For this one?
Yeah. So, you know, that area is just south of Woodstock. It sort of highlights how sort of limited access is sort of east-west. There's really no continuous way for people from Brentwood, Darlington trying to access services on Woodstock. So the grocery stores, you know, as far down as say autos, right? Really, you've got to, from rural up to Woodstock, there's no east-west access. You know, there's some pretty poorly maintained gravel roads. Some of them are better than others, but really like to actually, you know, bike or, you know, if, you know, for ADA accessibility or, you know, pushing a stroller, it's really, really challenging to navigate. You basically got to, you know, 48th up to Woodstock is sort of the only way that you can kind of make it there. You can't sort of cut east-west. And I think the Tolman Greenway is really exciting. I think that's a great project, but it actually ends at 52nd and doesn't connect over to 42nd. And I think, having that connectivity through the greenway, I think will be really important. The area that's currently marked is already pretty well paved, and I actually rode my bike on it over the weekend to kind of check it out, and it's a great location for a greenway. But really, like, if improvements were to be made, or like that greenway already as is, it's pretty usable from a biking standpoint. But without that connectivity between 42nd and 52nd, it feels like the value of that is significantly lower. And so by extending the greenway, I think you not only get, from 52nd, say, to 42nd along Tolman, you not only get much greater connectivity on bike, but then you also have that increased access for pedestrians, for, ADA, for just generally making, accessing those services on Woodstock. So I guess I would, to me, I think the biggest thing missing is sort of that connection on the greenway between 52nd and 42nd.
Okay, that's helpful. I know we talked about that sort of offline, and I think we agree, and I just want to sort of clarify that would require paving blocks of Tolman. I think we showed that with the existing conditions map, but just since it's not overlaid here, just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and that could be a cool opportunity for alternative street designs. I mean, I understand some of the concerns around paving, but really, like, for folks that are trying to navigate that area on foot or on bike, between Brentwood, Darlington, and all the services on Woodstock, it's a really challenging area to access and navigate through. And I think greenway extension would make a really big difference there.
Yeah, that's really good feedback, especially both your comments in combination, saying like maybe the street right next to Woodstock is a little less of a priority for paving. Maybe Tolman's a little higher priority for paving. That way we're not overdoing it. We know we kind of heard loud and clear that people don't want every single street to be repaved, and that's also not practical from a funding standpoint. So yeah, prioritizing which of those streets is really important. So appreciate that.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I really can't, sort of underscore enough, just that section has so many unpaved streets, east-west. It's so hard. Like you've got to go up to Woodstock, or again, all the way down to rural. There's no way to kind of cut through that neighborhood east-west, and especially on bike, it makes it really challenging. Increasingly, now that I'm pushing a stroller around, I'm finding that as well. And I just know, neighbors and stuff, that is kind of the main way folks, get to the farmer's market, get to the grocery store, get to the bank, and it is pretty limiting.
Brian, just to make sure you're aware, Misa originally had her hand up and I think it went down, and then Anna has her hand up currently. Misa, just want to make sure you didn't have something else you wanted to raise.
Oh yeah, I was kind of saying the same thing, living in Brentwood, Darlington all these years. It does get frustrating sometimes to see a lot of things added to neighborhoods that already have existing infrastructure when we have no sidewalks. And yeah, I was pushing a stroller years ago, and it was scary walking dogs and anything that can focus on, especially between Duke and Flavel, because south of Flavel does have some sidewalk networks, but there's pretty much nothing between Duke and Flavel, 50, I guess it would be like 60th to 72nd. I don't know, it's to 82nd. That to me should be a priority for any kind of traffic calming, bike safety, pedestrian safety. So if we're going to talk about priorities, it's, to me, it just does frustrate me to see stuff around that already have sidewalks, because just to have sidewalks would be such a gift. So even speed bumps would make me happy.
Yeah, what you can see on this map is that we really, because of the incredibly high cost of adding sidewalks where there are no curbs existing, it's millions of dollars just for a block, just to put it in context. So we don't think it's practical to sort of say we're going to add sidewalks to every single one of those streets, but that's why we've shaded it in this area traffic calming kind of shade, because if we can't add sidewalks, then the next best thing is to calm the streets, do speed bumps, really slow down traffic so that you feel safe and comfortable walking in that shared street environment. And then we also have the Cooper Street improvement concept, which would probably be sort of an alternative street design, really narrow street, or maybe sections of multi-use path in that area.
Yeah, but
Then-
yeah, thanks. Anna?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally agreeing with has been just explained. And when I look at those maps, and also from my experience when I navigate the neighborhood, 50-second is really a weird barrier to cross. And I think it has a lot to do with these kind of, streets that are not connecting straight, but are kind of, weirdly sectional and separated. So, but when I look at those plans and suggestions, they look very technical, and I understand that's what you have to do to be very technical and pragmatic. Especially, there are so many dollars involved. But I just wonder if there is, something to investigate a little deeper to find those ways where people are really crossing these two neighborhoods, where we really have this understanding of how do people actually function and make things work, especially when I hear people do want to bike. I do love to bike, but I barely take my bike out because there's just one way that I can go 40 A's, and then everything else is just like really difficult to navigate. And when we are talking about alternative street designs, I wonder if there is a relatively simple way of having just a very small strip of these unpaved roads that gets a little, asphalt or, some kind of denser material that makes it easier, and not go with a full-scale paved or sidewalk designed streetscape on this. And I think what bugs me the most are the crossings on 52nd and 45th and how these neighborhoods connect. And it makes it really difficult also to get to public transportation. That's just a headache. So, and I wonder if there are other ways to engage that planning that's not coming from that technical thing, but really looking how people participate in these kind of other ways of transportation.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, and I think, hopefully sort of making more formal sort of crossings, bikeway crossings, neighborhood greenway crossings of streets like 50 seconds would make it feel like less of a barrier or a dividing line. And potentially, we could think of alternative creative ways as well, ways to sort of celebrate the neighborhood. And and I'll just sort of note too that the alternative street designs, I have a slide on that a bit later about some potential options we could do there. So you'll see sort of what we've proposed in other neighborhoods in a few slides.
Yeah, and also I would add, you mentioned access to transit and bus stops. That's a perfect example of a prioritization criteria that we could use. So one of the ways to prioritize these busier streets would be, well, maybe the streets with public transit should be a little higher priority than other streets. We would take into account other factors as well, but that's certainly one that makes sense.
Yeah, Tim.
So one of the things I was really having a hard time with this is like this. Is there any way to apply from PBOT about what I would call sort of like a realistic factor? Because we could talk about these in the abstract and make priorities and like, yeah, it would be great if we could do all these things. Like, I think any project advisory group is going to ask for these things. So to me, having some sort of like, are we asking too much to get those roads paved or sidewalks or anything? Whereas something else might be more realistic to happen. And therefore maybe we put it higher in the priorities because we could actually get that stuff done.
Yeah, so feasibility is something that we typically try to consider in sort of these planning processes, and sometimes it is a really, really big project, definitely a need, but something that we just, can't, it's just going to take a while or, be millions and millions of dollars. So it is something we should consider. But at this point, I don't know, and maybe you disagree. I don't think we should like limit ourselves to excluding a project just because it's going to be very expensive. But on the other hand, I would say if we went and said all of these streets should have sidewalk, it would be sort of overwhelming, and it would take so much money to, like to kind of get to that level and time, that it would just be, it would kind of be challenging. So
Yeah, I guess I just look at whatever funding may or may not happen for this project in the future. It's a limited pie, I guess, in my mind. So it's, how do you allocate those resources to do the most good in my mind?
Yeah, it's, unfortunately, or sort of, well, it would be different if we had, say $10 million and we were all just sort of dividing out how much $10 million we have. There's not a set dollar amount right now. And so we can't say, how would you all like to sort of allocate that funding? It's a little bit more of a gray area.
I do think we could say though, that there's some projects that are a little more likely to be funded. Like we have a neighborhood greenway program that has money every year. We have a pedestrian program. So we have certain ongoing programs that we could use for some of these projects. But there's other things like street paving where we honestly don't have a clear source of funding for that. The funding that has been identified for street paving has been targeted for specific neighborhoods in the city. Cully, there's an area of Southwest, there's an area of Division Midway, and also the Errol Heights area is getting all those street upgrades. And all the money has been spoken for. So, so street paving may be one of those things that from a feasibility perspective or from a funding perspective is just more challenging.
But we also haven't got to that implementation phase yet. So that we want to kind of prioritize the projects, and then we can they kind of go hand in hand, but we can talk about from different bureaus and in our own bureau about strategies for implementation. So Scott.
I'll try and keep this short for time's sake. We're discussing these things around Tolman, which I've got a personal interest in because that's close to the area where I live, and I can say a bunch of things about like, oh, I love this about that. That's great. I'd like to take, I don't know enough where everyone from the project advisory committee is coming from, but just thinking that this discussion around that 52nd and Tolman is really close to Woodstock, which already has like a bunch of amenities. And I'm thinking about where my wife works, closer to Lent School on the further east side, and about like, because I don't frequent there as often, knowing about what the specific needs are over there, but knowing that that's where it tends to be lower income, there's more needs, there's more of all the different things that we're concerned about around violence, houselessness, and those issues. I guess just making sure that that is said, knowing that that should be one of the priorities, and then also inviting any folks that live in that area and have more precise knowledge of what the needs are I would love to hear that feedback to be able to incorporate in.
Yeah, great, thanks, Scott. And sounds like, that's another prioritization factor that we can consider is equity and even relative to the neighborhood.
And Brian, just mentioning a few things that were in the chat. Ben was agreeing with Bevan's assessment of the needs for improvements south of Woodstock. And Julie was agreeing about 52nd as well as 72nd being very scary to cross. And Miso is highlighting that people are not expecting sidewalks everywhere, but especially a traffic calming and increased pedestrian safety, given where things are currently.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Bill. So I do think sounds like we're on a move to prioritization a little bit. So we can start down that path. Did have a few things that we wanted to sort of touch base on, and some of these might be some hot button issues as well, but we already talked about the route for the neighborhood greenway west of 52nd Avenue, so we can check that one off. It sounds like Tolman, unless I sort of hear objections, is the sort of a focus there. But we'll look at 52nd, 72nd, and then how do we sort of treat gravel streets, and that's that alternative street design. So I'll run through these real fast, and then I can circle back if there's questions or comments. But this is 52nd Avenue between Duke and Flavel. Right now, it's it's the wider section of 52nd Avenue. So it's 48 feet wide. Typically you can have 2 lanes, still have bike lanes and then parking on both sides of the street. I think everyone would agree that the bike lanes are still not that comfortable to ride in. And we have an opportunity here for a really quick implementation project because it's scheduled for repaving in, I think, 2024.
Yeah.
So we have sort of these 2 different design options on the right that we could look at. One of these would be having parking on sort of parking protected. So the parking would be away from the street and protect the bike lanes, and then the bike lane could have some like a curb or a post separation on the other side. And then the other option would be a more buffered bike lane where on one side the bike lane, there's still some more separation, but the parking would be along the curb, and then the bike lane would be on the other side along the curb and protected. And I didn't say, but it's obviously that this requires removing parking from one side of the street. So it could shift from one side to the other, if there was a block that needed it on the west side and then to the east side. But that's sort of the way that we could enhance the bike lane in this section. And then north of Duke, which is not up for resurfacing at this time, it's a narrower section, so you can see parking's only on one side of the street. We couldn't make improvements there, but it would require removing all of that parking on the street. So any hot takes, reactions, comments on this? And just feel free to raise your hand if you do. And then I'll just note, remember though, this is the section where we're thinking about upzoning, right? Having more housing, more commercial opportunities, those types of things. Julie.
Yeah, well, this is an area that I will avoid on my bike because even though it's 25, people always speed through there, and it's absolutely terrifying to ride my bike on that street. And I will say that I would love to see this street get priority in some way, because when I do bike on it, it's so much faster because it just cuts straight through. Because I'm usually I live in Lentz, so I'm usually eventually making my way into, closer in Southeast or like downtown. And so 52nd to get over to the Clinton Greenway would be really great. But I've had so many, I feel like I hope I don't die. And I'm not exaggerating. It's really awful. So the idea of any improvement, I'm all for it. But I really I like the idea of having the parking be kind of the protected, like the parking is here and then we bike on the other side. I think that's, that first one I really like that, because what I've noticed with other designs, when you're in between the parked cars and the driving cars, there's the issue of hopefully not getting doored, because the bike lane is always right next to the car on the driver's side. But then also, for people who are driving and then they have to cross the bike lane to park. So I've just noticed a lot of, I'm trying to think, the new one they have on Broadway downtown is like that, where the cars, which is so nice. I rode on that the other night, where the cars are to my left, and then all of a sudden feel so much safer. I mean, there's still always room for issues, but because drivers are crazy, but I feel like I really like that idea better than just the second option. I mean, drivers just literally cannot be trusted to do the right thing or be, responsible. They're just, they're maniacs. I mean, even in my car, I get tailgated all the time. So anything that can improve 52nd, I'm all for it.
Yeah, just to explain a little bit about the trade-offs with these, you might be thinking, why wouldn't we just do the first one? Because that is like a higher level of bike protection. The main reasons would be funding. So if we don't identify any extra funding for this project, then probably we would end up doing the bottom one, because that's just striping. And that sort of comes for free with any paving project, is new striping that goes on top. The option at the top with the floating parking requires a lot of extra striping and paint and posts that all along the parking area. And so it just adds up and it costs a lot more. So if we would have to identify extra funding beyond the paving project to be able to afford that top one. And then the other thing is when the parking is floating like that out in the street, we have to remove a lot of parking for visibility's sake at driveways and intersections. And so if there's a lot of driveways and intersections, we might end up removing 3/4 of the parking rather than only half the parking. So it does tend to be a higher impact on the parking, and some businesses may just not have any parking near them. So those are sort of the trade-offs involved in these two.
Anna?
Yeah, I actually want to support Julie's comments, and I was just wondering, looking at your section, so you know, on the upper drawing you have there, I would really prefer that, and this is what I grew up with in Berlin, to be honest, but with one difference, and that is that the bike lane actually has the same height like the pedestrian walkways. Which then actually gives you, first of all, you are elevated above the cars a little more. And secondly, you have a very distinct separation. That's not the obstacle in the middle, what you have like on the right side, where this is what yes, right there. There is this, I assume this is like a concrete little whatever. So, and I just feel whenever there are extra obstacles or these poles, it just asks for disaster. So, and I think to do less and just try to stagger it in height, and how it works in Berlin is because you have to get to traffic lights occasionally. There is then a tiny little slope to get the bikes right where the crossroad is onto the street crossroad on the street level. But for safety reasons, those are the best ways of doing it.
Yeah, we would love that too.
I know.
That's the dream. It's just unfortunately, you know, funding here is I don't know. It seems a lot more challenging. But no, I totally hear you. And separation.
As those billionaires, they don't need to send more rockets and satellites into space. They should just get us bike lanes.
Yeah, look at the ear of Jeff Bezos. That'll be our implementation plan for this. No, that's a great point though. So and yeah, I totally hear you about this. So we don't have to solve this now. There'll be opportunities, but I just wanted to flag that. And in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep moving if that's okay. We can circle back.
Can I just ask
Yeah.
one question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I know we gotta move. So is option one objectively safer, like, than option two? From that's like, which one is the safest option out of those two?
That's a good question. I think, right, you know, so in the United States, and Zeph, feel free to jump in if you have other thoughts, but this is sort of a relatively new treatment. And so the sort of preliminary studies that have come out have found this to be a safer option, but you have to make sure there's visibility at intersections so that the drivers coming, you know, making a right turn, for example, can see the person biking in the same direction. Here, you know, there's obviously a risk of a car sort of, there's no separate or protection, right, for a car to kind of go be maniac, like Julie said. But they're hopefully, you know, they would see the cyclist, and so if they're turning right, there's a little bit more obviously visibility. They're right next to each other.
You have to pay attention.
So that's exactly, they're paying attention. So there's this vertical element, you know, that obviously if this car goes off the road, they're going to hit the car and not the bicyclist. But a lot of our crashes that happen occur at intersections or at driveways where a car is turning across the bike lane. And so I think you just have to, there's that sort of nuance of design and context that's really critical with these.
Yeah, I think we found that it really does depend on the number of driveways and intersections. If there's a driveway every 50 feet for a really long stretch, then the parking protected bike lane ends up really not having any parking in it. And it's just a big open area. And then drivers don't expect there to be a cyclist so far away. And it just tends to not work very well in those situations. But there are stretches of 52nd. I know, along the church property, there's just a long stretch with no driveways or anything like that. So we haven't gone out and like really investigated it fully, but there's probably some stretches where you could get some really solid protection out of the parked cars. So it really depends on the details of the street and the design, but overall the top one would be considered safer. And we also have a city policy that our desired design on streets above a certain volume, I think it's 6,000 vehicles a day, which 52nd does have. Our official policy is that we would want to do a protected bike lane, which is the top version. Sometimes we do the bottom version as an interim treatment because we just don't have the funding. So that's what we did on 45th Avenue, for example. When we repaved that street, it was basically what you see at the bottom because we had no money and we just did the cheapest thing we could to kind of claim the space. And someday we'd like to go in and make it better.
And yeah, Julie, do you have a response?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, one thing that would really help if we do have to go with the second option is like the space that's between the bike and the driving car. We get the plastic wands. I mean, I know cars can still drive over those, but at least they can see that there's a barrier and that wouldn't remove parking. I don't know if that would be an option to put, the plastic wands in there.
I think it could be if there was places where there was no parking, but if the car has to cross to park, then you can't have a one there because so that's the trade-off. But I think this is obviously a lot easier option, right? I mean, it's hard because it removes parking, but there's no sort of, you don't have to weigh that trade-off. It's here.
No ambiguity, yeah.
So moving forward to another tricky question that we wanted to sort of pose is 72nd Avenue. Again, this is another street that we're looking at some sort of more major land use changes. And because this street, the entirety of it is that same 40 feet, we have sort of an option that would, I think the top option is sort of what we're proposing on 52nd, removing all parking, and having protected bike lanes. And then the bottom option would be essentially doing what's on 52nd right now, which would be parking on one side of the street and then sort of just your standard 6-foot bike lanes, sort of adjacent to the parking lane and the travel lanes. And then I guess the third option, which we don't show here, was just, we don't have a resurfacing project, so sort of keeping it as it is, which is currently parking on both sides of the street and no bike facilities. Anyone have any thoughts? Yeah, Julie.
Well, I don't want to be dominating here, but this is another street. If there was treatment on that road, I would love to be able to ride my bike on there. I mean, it's actually worse than 52nd because I don't know. I mean, again, it's car speed. If they can, they will. And so I purposely avoid that street. And that would be I mean, I know with the plans for making that into a corridor and adding businesses. I mean, that's, there's going to be a reason to do all this to that street. But even right now with the way it is, it's really scary to ride on. So it's one of those things where you have to wind in and out of all these other streets when this would be such a great direct route. So even doing the bottom one would be a huge improvement, but of course the first one would be awesome.
Yeah. This has been, I think my vote would just be for the safest option. And obviously budget taken into account, but to prioritize whichever one is safer for bikes and pedestrians and cars as well.
Okay, thanks. Scott?
Yeah, to combine what Bevan was just mentioning, and then also Misa's comment around like, yeah, there would likely be a little more pushback to it. That I totally think there would be pushback, but now that I'm in a PAC role and not like representing the city so much, I would like to advocate for as pedestrian forward of an option as possible, thinking that like, yeah, you'd have some pushback in the near term, 5 to 10 years or so. But when I'm trying to think about where I'm raising my kids 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I think the correct answer is that as pedestrian forward as possible. That is the way that we're looking, and even beyond my kids' future, if we're trying to think like, if this doesn't change too much and this is going to have a lasting effect 50 years from now, I would like to do everything I can to advocate for that longer term future that's going to be a product of less cars and more pedestrian friendly infrastructure. So I would like to put a strong vote for that option.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I just wanted to flag, Tim, I see your hands up too, just flag to, as we're thinking about this, this is the apartments and townhouses sort of zoning here, where it's more mixed use in other sort of areas. Just to sort of, flag that this is typically happening, not necessarily, with parking on built into that, wouldn't be required. And so there is a potential, for some spillover if, and again, if there's no parking on 72nd, that just something to think about in that transformation about sort of surrounding neighborhood character as well. And also just wanted to flag that these options on 72nd wouldn't need to be, we could think about sort of different, right? Like the corridor's long, so it could be one thing partially or going through the commercial center or something, and then transfer. Tim, yeah.
So in terms of 72nd, which to me, I live closer to, so it's a little more personal. Am I understanding right that it's 40 feet wide and those are the options? And so now I do want to be clear, I am not anti-bicyclist. However, if we're limited by space, is there a reason to put bike lanes on 72nd when there might be other north-south alternatives in that area? Because I know people that bike, our business is in Cully, people don't bike up 57th, they go up the neighborhood street up 58th or something like that. So I just don't know where that breaking point is in sort of bicyclist traffic and other options and what makes the most sense with something like 72nd. Because I agree with what people are saying, like 72nd is, I wouldn't bike on it. It seems very dangerous for bicyclists.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tim. And so we have these funded neighborhood greenways on sort of 60th, or call it the 60s Greenway and 70s Greenways that are funded. And so, but that's still a pretty big gap between between 72nd. So I think that's where it's do you need it or not? And it's a sort of trade-off question we're having right now on a lot of our main streets about access adjacent to the main street. But if this is sort of transforming, there's a lot of apartments, a lot of development, a lot of people on that street, having front door access to a facility.
Yeah,
that is the trade-off.
But there's no like specific PBOT metrics about how the decision should be made on these things. It's more of a case by case type basis then.
Well, we do have policies about how frequent we should have bikeways just in the abstract. And I think it's about 800 feet between bikeways. That is our desired spacing. So that map that Brian was just showing would show a gap there. So in just an ideal world, we probably would have bike lanes on 72nd. The trade-off, of course, is that you're not just removing parking, but you're kind of removing the whole curb zone that can be used for, freight loading and all kinds of curb extensions and bike corrals, So it kind of gets at what do we want the character of this street to be? Do you want the bike lanes, or do you want this kind of flexible curb zone space that could be used for lots of different non-mobility purposes? I would add that you know, in some ways it's harder to put in bike lanes and remove parking in an established business district, like a main street that already exists and is super reliant on that parking. 72nd isn't quite like that. So it might be a little easier than like if we were going to remove parking from the Woodstock Main Street. But what Brian said earlier was crucial. It will mean that as these apartment buildings go in and businesses go in, it'll just put a lot more parking pressure on the surrounding streets. So people would just have to be prepared for like a lot of cars parked on all those side streets is what it would result in.
To Tim's point, is there like an alternative? I'm thinking of like Division and Clinton, where there's a greenway just parallel to sort of a more commercial street. Would like 71st, I guess if you head east, that you run into Mount Scott, but like, is there a parallel street where the greenway could potentially go?
Yeah, we could look at that, sort of a closer alternative, and we could also look at, you know, I think it sounds like we would need to make, and so I think it was Ben maybe in the chat that said, you know, it's sort of any improvement would be better, but like make a case of what this could look like with sort of a safer, lower speed neighborhood street, and maybe bring that back to you all for sort of some reaction to that as well. Sort of like a different scenario that wouldn't have bike lanes, but maybe would be more comfortable for all users. I know it's probably hard to imagine that though right now with the current situation on 72nd. But we can do more thinking on this because I know we're sort of getting shorter on time. So I'm gonna have Anna and then Julie go, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I actually have a similar question or comment like Bevan just had. You know, I mean, I understand that there are only a few continuous streets where you actually can go straight through in terms of, you know, being fast on your bike between different neighborhoods. But, you know, aside from feeling unsafe on 52nd or 72nd or 45th for that matter, it's also that I don't want to inhale all this kind of fumes. So when I do bike, I do want to go on these kind of calmer streets where I can actually hear people talking, where I can hear, you know, the birds, where I breathe fresh air, especially when I'm biking for a long time and I'm inhaling really deeply. So I kept wondering about these patterns. Why do we have to cramp everything into this if we have this alternative? And Clinton and Division is such a beautiful example. But this goes back to an earlier comment I had, where I think we are in this really tricky neighborhood because we have this kind of not continuous streetscapes. That's why I thought there might be the need for a much softer way of approaching it to figure out where people are actually already using lower traffic or lower impact streets for these kind of modes of transportation. Because we have these large gaps between, you know, Woodstock and Knapp. There is kind of this combobulation of getting through. If there would be a defined way of going through, and, you know, even Knapp, I mean, we commented on Knapp so often of crossing 45th, which feels so unsafe to me because it's just coming at this kind of steep hill where cars are coming up and crossing over. It's just, I would never cross with kids on a bike or by foot over this intersection. So, you know, there are all these things that I think we need to figure out what the future is on this. I mean, I always hope we're gonna have less cars personally, but
yeah.
We are still in America.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Julie?
Yeah, I was just gonna, I don't know, it's just, it gets a little, I don't know, frustrating, I guess, and oh, just put the bikes on a side street, you know, because a lot of people were wanting to get people out of cars and onto bikes. So to make biking a priority, I mean, for a million different reasons, but it's even like anytime I like riding on the greenways because they're quieter usually. But then it's like, it'd be so nice to be able to just ride right up to a business. Like, I mean, I know Hawthorne was a real big touchy one, but how sad, like, I have to figure out exactly which, I don't know, that's just an overall frustration with cyclists, being pushed off to side roads rather than being able to ride right on the arterials to get to where you're going. Like if you are using your bike instead of a car, it's not just, oh, I'm just going out for a ride. And, I do that too. And I definitely take the quietest streets, but if I'm actually trying to get somewhere, it's frustrating to have to use all these side roads that double the length of time to get somewhere. Then it just makes me want to just drive my car. And I don't want it. I would like biking to be a better option, but we need to have bikes able to be on arterials and not worry about dying every time you go out.
Yeah, thanks. And Nancy, do you have a follow-up comment?
I do. As an 83-year-old person, knowing that there's going to be 300,000 people over the age of 65 in the Portland area by 2030, as I understand it, bikes, I'm never going to ride a bike again. And we have an awful lot of people in our city that live in areas that don't have buses, and they're not going to be able to drive their cars, and they're not going to be capable of riding bikes. And I'm not against bikes either, but we really have to look at the elders too in our community and not just see how you're the age that many of you are that thinks you're going to be riding a bike forever. And most of you aren't going to be riding a bike forever. So please take your elders into consideration as you think about where bike lanes are and aren't, and all the lovely greenways that are set aside that may take an extra couple or 5 minutes for you to get to Hawthorne or to Division or to somewhere, but that mean that those folks that live there can catch a bus, perhaps. Maybe some of them will still get bus rides. Anyway, that's all. Just
no, thanks, Nancy, and appreciate your perspective. Appreciate everyone's perspective, and also just being really respectful of everyone else's opinion. So you guys are amazing. I think we said that before, but thanks for this. And it sounds like we have some more thinking we need to do on 72nd. So I really appreciate the sort of feedback, and we can think about, I think maybe we have an opportunity too with sort of potential land use changes that are going to be happening, to think about a build out, more to like what Anna was talking about earlier with sort of curb changes. So all that to say, we'll think more about this and hopefully have some, some refined alternatives to share further down. So, but in the interest of time, just wanted to sort of, we already talked about the sort of Tolman Greenway, but share this quick slide about some alternative street designs that could be something we're looking at with, that Tolman Neighborhood Greenway or other sort of places where it does seem like a community benefit to pave the street. These were on the bottom were designed for the Tryon-Stevens neighborhood street plan, which was a PBOT BES project in Southwest. So it's a little bit different context, which is a lot more elevation change, but thinking about how do you sort of pave streets in confined spaces and also sort of have some places for stormwater treatment. And still in some of these situations, you can see even have a sidewalk sort of in between the swale and some tree planting areas. So it does require probably it would still I guess a lot of these streets, even on Tolman, people have sort of taken the right of way, right, and used it, built planted things, sort of encouraged into that right of way. So it would change the character of the street, but it is an option. And Seth, can you remind me, is this in Coley or
No, it's from the Arrow Heights street
Oh,
plan.
that's right. Okay,
So-
yeah.
So
Thanks.
a lot of the streets in Brentwood, Darlington, in the Arrow Heights kind of sub neighborhood area are going to look like this, with basically a narrow paved center street with no curbs, and then a gravel shoulder on each side, and then areas for stormwater to drain into. And so it's a way to not spend nearly as much on the road, and also keep it really calm, because it's just a really narrow shared street environment. When it's this narrow, we can sign the streets at 15 miles per hour, which is really nice, and just kind of have everyone share the road. So just an example.
So yeah, just wanted to sort of throw that out there, and we can share some.
Yeah.
We haven't worked with our sort of, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, also to add, if there are sections of gravel streets with no driveways or no need for vehicle access, another option is to just pave like a 12-foot multi-use path just for bikes and pedestrians, and put bollards at each end to close it off to car traffic. So that's really a case-by-case basis. You know, some blocks can allow that, some don't, but that's another option.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, thanks, Seth. I know we're running short of time. I wanted to have a little bit more time for prioritization, but before we get there, wanted to call out that sort of in really good sort of synergy. TriMet has actually been looking at some bus network changes coming out of COVID, thinking about sort of who is riding by buses, who's sustained that ridership throughout, to kind of really get at where the needs are, and also with a sort of more forward equity focus. So they're calling it Forward Together, and the consultant that worked on our plan, doing the transit analysis, also did the transit analysis for TriMet. And so it was a really great way to sort of take our recommendations, you know, and share those with TriMet, and fold them into this work. So a lot of the recommendations that that we've made align with what's going to be coming out in the Forward Together recommendations. We unfortunately can't, it's like 2 days away from being made public, so we can't share the map with you all tonight. But I will, as we sort of send out the notes, I'll put a link into it, and you can also just Google TriMet Forward Together, but we'll share out that because what we'll really want you all to do and sort of share with the community is advocating for the things you like about it and the things that you might want changed. So if you're a transit rider especially, definitely be looking at that.
Yeah, so that'll come out on Wednesday, and they've said there's going to be a 2-month public comment period, so through sometime in November. So there'll be a lot of time for you all to weigh in, for the whole neighborhood to weigh in on those changes. I think people are going to be pretty happy with a lot of the changes that you see, but there might be details that you might want to see change, or we might want to see change. So we'll keep working on it. And you know, this last bullet point here, we still have some scope with that consultant firm, so we can have them do some analysis on just some different options coming out of that Forward Together plan.
But again, I think it's going to be a great sort of early implementation thing that comes out of this planning process.
Oh, boy.
And then just lastly, so we are needing to move to prioritization and getting to that sort of tiered list of projects. Yes, Misa, just the plan will be released by TriMet after this Wednesday. They have they're planning to release it on Wednesday. So I'll send out an email to the group letting you all know about it and how to comment.
Okay.
And then, so we're moving to the list of projects. I talked a little bit about this at our last meeting, but you know, we have this group of projects that we talked about tonight, needing to sort of move it into tier 1, tier 2 projects, possibly tier 3. And then this is sort of how we start to, the tier 1 is going to be like sort of the immediate focus of our PBOT staff in terms of getting those funded. And so just throughout some potential prioritization factors, these kind of align with what we typically do in our planning process, but there's some nuances. So for one, we have this community development scenario that's sort of the land use component that we want to be sort of in alignment with. So that's something we should consider. Safety is always something we think about. But I did hear this from Misa earlier, and so reiterate that the focus should be on projects that serve either within or serving the Brentwood Darlington, sort of that core focus area of the plan. Not to say that that wouldn't be projects outside, but just kind of helping with that connectivity. We usually look at parks and schools. I don't have transit on here, but that was brought up tonight. It's like another good one. And then we typically look at community support and then that feasibility cost as well. And in the interest of time, I developed a Jamboard. I didn't share out the link because I wanted sort of the focus to be on this conversation, but I'll add a sort of note in the Jamboard that we send out as well. That way, if you have any thoughts about prioritization factors that you think should be considered, that's probably the best way for us as a committee to keep having that conversation. So look for that in the next couple of days, and we can think more about prioritization, and then that will help us as we then move and come back and sort of talk about, as we tier these projects. And that's not to say that they can't move up and down and have conversation, but that's just wanted to sort of highlight, because we're getting close to this, like, it seems like we've been together for a long time, but we're finally kind of getting towards that part of the draft plan. And once we get to like this sort of winter phase, and then through the holidays, it really starts, it's going to become more of like getting support, advocating for this plan adoption and getting through planning commission and council. So I know that was a lot, just to sort of close this out, and then happy to stay a few minutes later to answer questions. But we are planning to share these projects and also the community development scenario with our technical advisory committee, which is different bureaus and a few different outside agencies like TriMet in October, working on that draft plan outline. And we do have a meeting scheduled for next month in October, where we could talk more about these sort of refined maps and projects, and also provide an update on anti-displacement work. But if you have any other ideas or requests that you want us to present on, if you want other sort of things that are percolating that we've brought up, let me know, or you can send our group the email, and we're happy to sort of fold those in. Guest speakers, whatever sort of ideas you have, we're open to them. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Oh, Brian, I just might add, we'll definitely talk among staff about what we heard tonight, and a lot of good conversation and strands that were not entirely resolved. So we'll discuss how much of this could benefit from further discussion in October. One thing on the land use side we wanted to discuss was bring to the group some ideas for specific zoning changes. When we were talking about the preferred framework or the scenarios, we're kind of at a bubble diagram sort of stage. And we wanted to start talking to you about where specifically we might apply commercial zoning, where we might be able to expand some of the multi-dwelling zoning, especially in the neighborhood center area, and some questions too about how that area interfaces with 82nd, which has employment zoning. So stay tuned for October 24th and really beginning to get into the details of zoning.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so look for an email from us probably later this week, probably on Thursday, with I'll include a Jamboard link, information about the TriMet plan, and I'll also provide the slide deck so you have that as well. Other than that, I will let you all go. Enjoy the cooler air, hopefully now, and but I'm happy to stay as well if anyone has questions. So. Thanks everyone for being here tonight.
Hey, thanks.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Night night.
All right, I got one quick question for you. So basically, next meeting, you're going to turn around with sort of, based on this conversation, like tier 1 priority projects, tier 2, sort of like proposed transportation projects. Or is-
Yeah, hopefully. In the interest of, yeah, sort of in the interest of like the project timeline, I think we probably need to get moved to that level. So depending on staff, like if we don't end up having capacity to do that, then we might just sort of provide an update more on what we talked about, have some ideas for 72nd or refined map, but yeah, we want to get to that level.
Cool. Thanks. Looks delicious, Scott.
Yeah, I want some.
Looks too healthy.
Scott, I come over right away.
All right.
Yeah, and I'll just note Bevan too, like, so we'll sort of have that tier 1, tier 2, and what we did in Northwest in Motion was with the tier 1 projects, we did have sort of more detail. So like, actually showed like where the crossings would happen, or sort of, how we designed sort of some of those improvements. That gets them, I feel like with Northwest in Motion, that's got those projects off the shelf a lot easier.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really helpful to have like a lot of detail about those tier 1 projects so that everybody understands, everybody can refer to it when we're doing the projects. We just send them a link to the plan.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Not to belabor the point about that Tolman Greenway extension, but I'm kind of wondering, maybe even assuming a little bit that wasn't included in the initial project list, perhaps because of how expensive and potentially controversial paving is. I still think that connectivity, for all the reasons I described earlier, is super important. But I do wonder if I would hate to see that Tolman Greenway, not get prioritized because, say, paving that one section is challenging. So if it makes sense to break that up as 2 separate projects, although at the same time, like, I think that paving piece is so critical to the value of that greenway that I don't even want to make that recommendation because it's important. So, but also the reality of the situation. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll just have to discuss that more internally. There's pros and cons to both ways you're describing it. I mean, I would typically divide that into 2 projects because it's so different. One is like cheap, low-hanging fruit project. The other one is just a much bigger deal. But we also should just talk. We'll just have to talk about like, maybe we should just have one street paving project in tier 1 at least, so that we're being guided, to something like that. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your feedback. Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
great job, everybody. This is awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian and Zeph, can I ask an unrelated Southeast question?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's misdirected. I just know that you are the 2 people I know from Peabody, but in the Cully neighborhood at the intersection of 57th and Fremont, that's where our business is. How do I talk to somebody about a little more safety measures being put in place there? Because we just had another pretty serious car accident right in front of our business. And I mean, I've seen pedestrians get hit. I've seen everything. And I don't know where that ranks in sort of the city's collision intersections to sort of be addressed. I know that those plastic bumps to try to slow people down when they turn left were put in the last year or 2. But gosh, it is just so dangerous.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the best thing. I mean, really the best thing to do is to email your concerns to safe@portlandoregon.gov, or call 823-SAFE and leave a message, because what that does is it starts a process where a traffic engineer will go out on site and do an assessment and look at whatever problem you're describing. They'll see if there's any like low-cost solutions, things they can do to improve safety. Sometimes the result is they come up with a solution that's too expensive, and then, but it does get put on a list of future projects, so it's still valuable to have that information. So that's what I would recommend. The other thing is, the good news, good and bad, is the good news is we do have a funded project, or it looks like Metro is going to fund a multi-million-dollar project on 57th and Cully Boulevard, between Prescott and Fremont. And that project will include a full traffic signal rebuild there at 57th and Fremont, and protected bike lanes and sidewalk improvements and all kinds of safety improvements. The bad news is it won't happen for probably 5 more years. So there's always a long delay with these big federal projects, but we did recently, hear that that's recommended for funding.
Okay, that's great. Thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate it.
I
Great.
just want to take this opportunity. I had a very nice talk with Bill and Cassie a few weeks ago, I think already. And since to have my students engage in our project area, and I presented that today, and they were really, really excited. Actually, they don't know exactly the place, the area, but they know kind of where it will be. And they're very excited to actually get feedback from you. And I just want to extend that invitation to Brian and Sept if you're interested as well. I would like to join this together because we are working in this kind of urban question of weaving things together and working with the public space and the infrastructure. And I think it would be very interesting just to get some alternative ideas out with the students. I know it's very out there for you. It's
No,
not
I enjoyed your class last year. It was way outside of like the confines we have to think about, and so it was really fun. It was refreshing. But and it sounds like 72nd we have plenty of things to think about in that corridor.
Yeah.
So.
Great to hear, Anna. I think we'd definitely like to be engaged and still putting in the plug for the 72nd / neighborhood center area around Favel.
Yeah.
A lot of issues there.
Yeah, no, I will engage that with the students and then also see how much I can guide them to be relative specific in their design approaches, also to understand how these kind of traffic patterns work. I try to make that, a thing that reinforces one another. So I'm gonna follow up soon. Today was the first day with a little more precise dates, so we can start organizing. So you can put that on your calendars early enough. I hope.
Yeah, and if it's helpful too for us to sort of give a quick, to your class, a quick, the explanation about what we do in transportation, what BPS, that I think it could help orient them maybe.
Yeah, that would be great actually. Yeah, thank you.
I'm gonna stop. I realize we're still recording, so I'm gonna